My name is Cody Lindquist. I'm the Director of Recovery Services with the Human Development Center. And joining me tonight is Tanya Benarek down below there. And she is a licensed alcohol and drug counselor and psychotherapist with HDC as well. Tonight we'll be discussing the effects of peer pressure and parental substance use on children and adolescents. This is a topic that Tanya and I are very passionate about. Not only are we in the field, but we are both parents as well, and Jamie included in on that. And so it's something that is very near and dear to our heart when raising children and thinking about the effects of peer pressure and substance use. Substance use is something that has long been stigmatized, and after tonight, we do hope, and going through our presentation, we do hope that you will be a little bit closer to breaking the silence about addiction. We do have a question and answer set up for the end, but please, we invite you to start entering any questions that you would have in the chat, and then towards the end, when we get to the question and answer, we will answer those questions starting from the top. If you don't put them in there, you can, I believe you can raise your hand. Is that correct, Jamie, or do they have to enter them in the chat?
You can raise your hand or enter them in the chat. But if you enter them in the chat, then they're there and we can go back to them. If you raise your hand, we'll have to unmute you, and we can certainly unmute at the end, but during the presentation, you might just want to kind of put them on the side for now.
Perfect. Thank you, Jamie.
All right, I'm Tanya Benarek, and I've been with HDC for 7 years. I'm dually licensed as a therapist and an LEDC. So I'm going to start out the presentation. We're going to talk about the parental substance use. Can everybody see the screen? Good. All right, so 1 in 5 children in the US live with a parent who is addicted to drugs or alcohol. When somebody is addicted to drugs or alcohol, that impairs their ability to effectively parent. It impacts their own physical and emotional health and behaviors, and it affects their ability to consistently prioritize their children's basic physical and emotional needs. And often it's over their own need for substances. It's been found that children will experience some severe impacts to their health and development, and we'll kind of touch on that in a little bit. But there's also children who come from homes from parents who are addicted. They are at an elevated risk of social problems. So an earlier onset of substance use, faster acceleration in substance use patterns, and higher rates of alcohol and drug use disorders, which inevitably perpetuates the multi-generational cycle of addiction. There is a video here. Cody, are you able to pull those up? Let's see. It's kind of talking about parental substance use.
You should be able to control click on it.
I've got it pulled up.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, I could pull them up. I'm sorry if you did the.
All right. Can everybody see that? There's an ad. All right.
Maybe turn the volume up a little, Tanya.
Today, Tori is a remarkably complete 14-year-old telling her story, her way. What do you remember about this parents and mom? Remember she had no food for there, no water, and then they're like, I had to keep myself. I consider myself as a parent and love again. This is not so much. That is stressful. One time.
Tanya, if you mute, I think the volume goes away.
Tori said she never got any help for growing up. adolescent that very, very, very nice. Nothing. Her mom would not tell anyone about the car in their home. Or would tell her grandparents when they ran out of food. 2 years ago, Lillian and Richard were awarded legal custody when she could live with them permanently. Maybe if I was there, I wouldn't have done it. If it wasn't just for its mom abusing heroin in their home, it was for her uncle, the person Corey had a father figure. What happened to him? He passed away November 20th, 2015 from a gun overdose. Heroin. That was just super hard. Yeah, because I mean, he basically took care of me instead of my mom. Like, if my mom was asleep, he took care of me. And so it was just, it was sad. Yeah, so that's my help on that. So whenever, yeah, this is at 15 years old, Corey has seen enough pain from lifetime, making her spirit and attitude today all the more impressive. That's a good question. Okay. Why are you talking to us? Because I want to spread awareness on how drugs have not only affected my life, but have probably affected a lot of other kids' lives. And I want to just help people for a mother knows that she's sharing.
All right. So that video there demonstrates some of the impairment that a mother can have or a father can have when they're using substances. And depending on the substance used, and it can vary, the impairment can vary. So it's going to look different when somebody is under the influence of methamphetamine versus heroin versus alcohol. So that it definitely impacts the impairment that a parent has.
Tanya, would you be able to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but would you be able to kind of explain the video a little bit? It was really hard to hear.
Oh, okay.
It was hard to, I mean, we could kind of understand that she was in a family with somebody who used drugs and alcohol, but wasn't sure. Can you just kind of get a little synopsis of it?
Yeah, so it's basically the 14-year-old talking about her experiences with her mother using substances, using heroin. She talked about the difficulties that she had, a lot of difficulties with school, with kind of growing up, with being taken out of her home, that sort of thing. She really just talked about a lot of those difficulties that we'll touch on too later on in our presentation.
I think it's worth mentioning too, like Tanya was saying, this girl that was shown on here is extremely well adjusted to life. It's something that is very rare in these situations. Someone who grows up, and all three of us can attest to, when we see individuals within within HDC, 85 to 90% of them, if not higher, have trauma of some variety from their adolescent and their childhood. And so they struggle with these things. And this gal is certainly rose above and beyond, and is now sharing her story, and is living with her grandparents, was taken over by her maternal grandparents, and been able to share the message with individuals that have gone through the same thing. So within parental substance use, some statistics: in 2019, the percent of victims of child maltreatment with caregivers who abused alcohol or other substances increased. There's a strong statistical link between child maltreatment and parental substance abuse. One third to 2/3 of child maltreatment cases involve substance use to some degree. In one study, children whose parents abuse alcohol and other drugs were 3 times more likely to be abused and more than 4 times more likely to be neglected than children from non-abusing families. Child neglect, which is often a result of substance abuse, is a leading reason for foster care entry as well. Child neglect was the finding in 61% of child maltreatment cases in the study below.
That's pretty significant, the 61%. I'm working with County and in my role with North Star Families. And I'm working with parents who struggle with substance use, and just learning on the county side how many referrals are getting, how many reports they're getting for children with maltreatment is very, very disheartening. It's definitely a problem. They're also finding too that higher rates of neglect have been noted in rural populations, so populations such as our own. And a lot of the abuse and neglect can come from a parent's erratic and violent behaviors that can occur when they're under the influence. They've also found that 2/3 of people in treatment for drug abuse report being abused or neglected as children. And another interesting statistic that I found was more than 1/3 of adolescents who report abuse or neglect will have a substance use disorder before their 18th birthday, which is 3 times as likely as those without a report of abuse or neglect.
Nine-year-old Hagen Steele just started living full-time with his father Stetson near Salt Lake City this summer. He moved in with his father's family after his biological mother, Lacey Christensen, and stepfather, Colby Wild, were arrested. Both were using heroin. Tell me about 4th grade.
It's very hard
It
with
is?
math.
Over Legos, Hagen told me why he missed a lot of school last year in 3rd grade.
You miss the bus sometimes?
Yeah.
Yeah. How come that would happen?
Well, because I woke up by myself, got ready by myself, and yeah.
He says he would often make dinner for his 2 younger brothers and take care of his newborn sister.
One time at night, my 4-year-old brother woke up and started crying, and then my littlest brother woke up, started crying too.
Why were they crying?
Mom and Dad weren't there.
It sounds like you kind of had to take charge sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
His father and stepmom, Sammy, had no idea the burden Hagen was shouldering.
He would say he was tired and would almost sleep all the way here from their house.
But then in June, an emergency phone call from Utah's Division of Child and Family Services. Hagen's mother and stepfather had been arrested for stealing and then admitted to something unthinkable. They told police that when Hagen's sister was born last April, they knew she would be addicted to heroin since her mother used through the pregnancy. So when the baby was still in the maternity ward, stepdad Colby told police he secretly rubbed opioid drugs on the newborn's gums to prevent her from going into withdrawal and having seizures.
They realize if they can keep their babies from having symptoms for a period of time, they get discharged, then they might bypass being reported.
And having the child taken away.
Dr. Stephen Minton has been at Utah Valley Hospital for 38 years.
There's a little baby in here right now who's in withdrawal?
Yes.
The hospital has a regimen to care for newborns in withdrawal. Parents circumventing the system don't.
They put their child at unbelievable risk to have seizures and even death.
When police discovered what had happened to Hagen's newborn sister, Sammy and Stetson initially took in the newborn, Hagen, and his 2 brothers. They had all 4 children drug tested.
And what did they find?
They found that the baby girl had meth, heroin, and morphine in her system. The 2-year-old boy and the 4-year-old boy had meth in their system. And then our 9-year-old son didn't have anything in his system.
That's got to be stunning information to take in.
It was awful.
Hagen's 3 siblings have since gone to live with their biological grandparents. He knows his mom and stepdad are in jail.
Yeah, I know everything.
You do?
Every single thing.
Can you tell me?
That they did drugs. Yeah, they gave my little sister drugs.
Are you kind of angry?
Yes, very.
Sammy and Stetson tell Hagen he no longer has to be in charge.
We're the parents. We're going to cook dinner. We're going to change diapers, and we've got this.
They've signed Hagen up for Boy Scouts and encourage him to spend time with friends.
And so we're hoping that's something we can, slowly get him into and being a kid again.
Needs to be a 9-year-old again.
Yes.
In this particular case, the stepfather pleaded guilty to child abuse. The mother's case is still pending, and our special series on this issue will continue.
Kid mentioned, sorry about that, extremely heartbreaking. You know, I think it's important to mention that this is obviously an extreme case when it comes to child neglect and substance use within the parental family. But you know, I think that it doesn't need to be this severe for there to be effects on children, and that's something that, you know, parents who are even just drinking alcohol at home struggle. You know, there's struggles there because their children don't have the attention of mom and dad that they might if they weren't.
Yeah, both videos do a very good job at showing some of those parental deficits that oftentimes parents are less warm with their children and they're less responsive, as you've seen. They don't engage with their children very often, whether that's physical or verbal. Also some research has also shown too that parents will become over involved with interaction styles as children get a little bit older. They tend to be more punitive with their discipline, and the children tend to have a less parental monitoring. And then also they tend to have an authoritarian parental style, which also is very problematic. And we'll kind of talk about more of that in the following slides. But with children having to grow up basically on their own, it really, really does a lot of damage to them. And it really sets the tone for a high risk of substance use as they get older. One of the things, besides the children's environments, living environments, and their mental health, there's a 50 to 60% heritability chance for children who have parents who are addicted. So these children that come from parents who have been addicted, they are already at risk for substance use. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about like what happens with addiction and how it works and how it interacts with the brain. And so we'll kind of be able to see the process of addiction throughout the presentation. So with the prenatal disclosure too, children will have a lot of mental health issues. One of the biggest ones that research has shown to have is oppositional defiant disorder. And that's where children can get into a lot of stuff with legal issues, juvenile court systems, depression, anxiety, lack of lower self-esteem, and even lack of control of their environment. All right, so share my screen again. All right, so they mentioned the prenatal, the opiate prenatal exposure. So there are some information about that. Seeing as we're in a pandemic right now with opiates, there's been a lot of research done. And a lot of the research has shown that children with prenatal opiate exposure have they have poor coordination during childhood and have more behavioral problems, such as hyperactivity, brief attention spans, sleep disturbances, and temper outbursts at the ages of 12 to 24 months of age. But this also can last throughout the developmental span of childhood. They've also found a language delay with children 24 to 32 months of age. And mothers who are on maintenance, methadone maintenance, or that, they also struggle with that. Children are more impulsive, they're immature and irresponsible than those unexposed peers, and then they perform poorly on intelligence tests at ages 3 to 7 years of age. Overall, children have a lot of difficulties with learning when they're exposed to opiates. There is a lot of Suboxone is another medication that is really becoming popular for treatment of opiate use disorders, and there is not a lot of research out there that shows the effects of children in utero, but they are showing that long-term developmental outcomes of Suboxone exposure are limited, but they are showing that the children are scoring lower in a Bailey cognitive and language scales compared to children who are not exposed.
Through Tanya, if you want to unshare there, I have the next slide or the next video ready to go to. So Tanya and I have talked a lot about, obviously all these things throughout this and parenting ourselves and thinking about this. And, we talked about sugar and TV and money, and all of these things that are a daily part of all of our children's lives, the way that it is. Everyone, it seems, you get older and then you say, there's no way I was like this as a kid. But, it seems like the children, everything is driven through social media and money. And then, of course, the candy and sugar and stuff. And that's before any of this stuff even happens. And so the risk that they're already facing, is extreme. So. This gives a little, I should have introduced the video a little bit. This is just introducing the brain story as it mentions here, and it's a good illustration of how substance use affects the brain for children.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their minds. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
Thank you for being with us through the videos too. I think Tanya and I both discussed, we had the multiple videos to be able to share, and I think it's always just it's a good illustration. They have a excellent way of being able to display these things that we might not be able to put into words.
Here's just a little bit. So we're going to kind of move over into the substance use among teens. So there are some stats here, and there are a ton of statistics out there about substance use. But some of the ones that I picked here are alcohol, marijuana, and tobacco are the substances that are most commonly abused by adolescents. Students report by 12th grade, about 2/3 of the students have tried alcohol. About half of the 9th through 12th grade students reported ever using marijuana. About 4 in 10 9th through 12th grade students reported having tried cigarettes. Vaping is also a very, very popular with the youth these days. And there's a lot of misconceptions. They think that it just tastes good. They don't realize that there's nicotine in it. And there's also vaping too that is marijuana. It's THC. So among 12th graders, close to 2 in 10 reported using prescription medicine without a prescription. And then although this one is really surprising to me, but although it is illegal for people under 21 years of age to drink alcohol, the findings show that people from 12 to 20 years of age consume about 1/10 of all alcohol consumed in the United States. That's very high and very concerning.
The statistics are always interesting to look at because, we as parents, we're raising children and, we like to think that we're doing the best job that we can. And we likely are, doing the best job that we can. But when you hear some of these statistics, it's like, we can only do so much and be there and try to influence our children and put them in the best position that they can be to succeed. So with substance use among teens, adolescent brains are more vulnerable to the temptation to use substances and to the effects of these substances because the reward pathways develop before prefrontal cognition, which is the final stage of development within the brain. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for cognitive control functions such as reasoning, problem solving, comprehension, impulse control, and the ability to identify consequences of actions.
It's not easy being a teenager. There's the angst, the emotions, the raging hormones. And although hormones do play a big role in puberty, the brain is going through a lot of changes too. Neuroscientists are learning that some of the most puzzling teenage behavior may actually have some real benefits. Legally, you're considered an adult when you turn 18, but from the neuroscience perspective, your brain is really still developing.
And the current literature suggests that it's about around age 25 or so is when the brain finishes the period of adolescence.
This is Dr. Adriana Galvin, and she runs the Developmental Neuroscience Lab at UCLA. The brain develops from the back to the front, so the prefrontal cortex is the last region to fully develop.
The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain you need to make good decisions, to think about the future, think about consequences.
You can kind of think of it like the Spock of the brain, logical, calm, and collected. And then deeper in the brain, there are these emotional systems like the limbic system that are more interested in immediate gratification. They're sort of like Captain Kirk, a risk taker and a bit emotional. During the teenage years, the limbic system develops really quickly, and the prefrontal cortex is trying to catch up. Eventually, as individuals become adults, the prefrontal cortex will increasingly have more influence over behavior than the impulsive part of the brain. So, without a fully developed prefrontal cortex, you can kind of see why teens might be more impulsive or just worry less about future consequences. Another brain region that's really active during adolescence is this thing called the striatum, and it's a key part of the brain's reward system. Let's say you find 20 bucks on the street, or someone gives you a cookie. The striatum goes off, and it releases dopamine into the brain. Adriana's lab discovered that the teenage brain is super sensitive to different rewards like sugar and money. Way more than in the brains of adults and children. And all this activity in the brain's reward center, it may actually serve a purpose.
We asked teenagers to come to the lab and we scanned their brains while they performed a learning task. They were shown a picture of a butterfly and 2 flowers, and they were asked to guess which flower the butterfly would land on.
After each guess, they were given feedback. When the teens got it right, their striatum would get really active.
They would learn over time that the butterfly preferred one flower over the other. And everybody learned this task. But what we found is that the adolescents learned it more quickly than adults and with greater accuracy.
So having this reward center that's hyper-responsive to feedback actually helps teenagers learn from their environment. But this same region of the brain is also connected to risk-taking. Data from Adriana's lab suggests that teens with a more reactive striatum are more likely to engage in risky behavior and to enjoy it.
Rather than ask how you keep your teenager from taking risks, because we know the brain is really oriented towards risk during this time, it's better to ask, how do I provide opportunities for healthy risks?
Like trying out for the school play, even if you've never acted before, or asking someone out on a date. Those are real risks to a teenager, but they're not the kind of risks that parents typically worry about.
It makes sense from an evolutionary perspective that there's a time in life when teenagers want to become more independent, seek out new opportunities. In the animal world, this would translate into looking for new food resources or foraging behavior. And in teenagers, it often manifests as risk-taking behavior and simply moving away from the family unit.
Teenagers are going to make mistakes, but they've got this brain that's encouraging them to learn and explore and push boundaries.
So adolescence is a really special time, and I think we don't appreciate enough their energy and their ability to lead and to motivate, and how excitable they find life in a way that we maybe we don't later in life.
Our brains keep changing throughout our lives, and researchers at UC Berkeley are learning that if you give people a little bit of power, it can have a big effect on the brain. Learn more by watching our video here, and be sure to subscribe.
All right. I think the biggest takeaway for me when I watch this video and really am thinking about this process is really the part where not to necessarily try and always make sure that our children are avoiding all risks, but really rather supporting positive risk taking. You know, when she talked about, trying out for the school play, or trying, encouraging them to ask someone on a date, or to even, in children, and doing things that are uncomfortable. And of course, as we know, all children have different uncomfortability levels. And so really challenging them to do that. I know for my own son, when I think about this, he's a little bit of an introvert. And so when it comes to sports, we just started soccer again. And so, getting him to really challenge him to, get out of the house from the games and do that, and let him know and remind him how much fun he, has every time he does it, and it's like when we go to the gym, for instance, if we're not regular gym goers, and it's so hard to get there, but then when we get there, we typically are rewarded with good feelings at the end of it. And so really supporting that with our children is an important task, I believe. So some risks of substance use, the effects, the growth and development of teens, especially the brain development, is talked about on there. Of course, occurs more frequently with other risk behaviors, such as unprotected sex and dangerous driving, the things we have to look forward to as our children grow into the adolescent teenage years, of course. Contributes to the development of adult health problems such as heart disease, high blood pressure, and mood disorders and sleep disorders. Finally, the earlier teens start using substances, the greater the chance of continuing to use substances and developing substance use problems later in life. When teens begin drinking at an early age, they increase the chance of becoming addicted to or continuing to use substances later in life. One interesting fact that we found throughout this research was that for adolescent boys, teenage boys, it didn't matter if this is going back a little bit to the parental use, but if they saw mom and dad, it didn't matter for the male if mom or dad was drinking, that would lead to a further likelihood that they were going to, go into and experiment with those same things. But for female teens, it was actually more related to the mother, and that would then lead them to go into some of the drinking behaviors and habits and things like that. Whereas if it was just the father drinking but not the mother, the female had a far less likely chance of experimenting with those things. So just an interesting little tidbit from one of the researches that I found.
another important thing to note too is that there is also research that shows that depending on what a teenager is using, how much they're using, and their route of administration of the substances, that all plays a massive impact on the developing brain, as we know, but it can actually stunt the growth, the progression of the growth of the brain. So when there is some abstinence, long-term abstinence, it does take a while for the brain to heal and kind of bounce back. They can make those gains back in the emotional and like immature type levels. I don't know if any of you have the experience of working or having family members or knowing of people who are adults, but they really kind of act immature, or they're just really emotionally stunted and have a hard time regulating emotions. And that's if they're sober, they may have had done some damage to their brain that was not able to repair itself. So I think that's a really important thing to know too. And as we can see with the prefrontal cortex of the brain being the last to develop, the chance of children experimenting is so high, and they don't realize the consequences. So how does drug use progress into addiction? So all drugs affect the brain differently, but they all react on one area of the brain, and that is called the dopamine reward center, or the dopamine reward pathway. That is the part of the brain that is activated whenever we do something that is pleasurable for us, anything that's life-sustaining, so sex, eating, thirst. Anytime we do those things, anytime we do things that are pleasant to us, like for teens, if they're engaging in sports or listening to music or being with friends, they're going to get hits of dopamine from that. The difference is when teenagers use substances, the amount of dopamine that is being released in their brain is far higher than what it is with natural rewards. So again, the hanging out with friends, listening to music, eating, and that becomes very, very problematic. What ends up happening is the brain ends up getting hijacked. So the dopamine reward system, it takes over the brain. And when it does that, it really creates an especially strong drive to repeat the substance use. The immature brain that's already struggling with balancing impulse and self-control is more likely, again, to not think about those consequences. If the experience is repeated, the brain reinforces the neural links between pleasure and drug taking, making the association stronger and stronger. So over time, the drive to use is becoming life-sustaining. This addiction literally goes into a life or death in the brain. So that makes it very difficult that for people to stop. They end up having to take the drug consistently and eventually to feel normal. The development of addiction is a vicious cycle. Chronic use not only realigns a person's priorities, but it alters those key brain areas, as we talked about, like with the judgment and self-control, which further reduces an individual's ability to control or stop their use. This is why, despite popular belief, willpower alone is often it's very insufficient to overcome an addiction. And drug use has compromised the very parts of the brain that make it possible to say no. And that is one of the biggest misconceptions about addiction is you have willpower, you have a choice in this. And yes, there is a choice in it, but when we think about this developing brain and we think about how ill-equipped they are to be able to handle these decisions and being able to see the consequences, it's not hard to see how addiction happens so quickly and where addiction really starts. There's a lot of research too that shows that when the teens start the substance use at a very younger age, especially by 18, if they're using regularly before 18, by 20, they are very likely to have an actual substance use disorder. And oftentimes, Cody can speak to this too, when we meet with adults that come into our program, it is very, very rare that we have somebody come in that has not used substances significantly when they were teenagers. And also the younger they start also increases the risk of having a substance use disorder in the long run.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. That's a lot of really good information, and we're obviously breezing through. We could do an hour and a half presentation on any one of these topics, but we wanted to kind of hit some of the highlights within it. And so peer pressure is kind of the last little area apart from the resources and how to get someone help that we'll discuss. So when thinking about peer pressure can influence adolescents' choices about a lot of things. New research shows that when making a decision, teens think about both the risks of and rewards of their actions and behaviors. But unlike adults, teens are more likely to ignore the risk in favor of the reward. For instance, the development process of individuation reflects the development of an adolescent's positive emotional autonomy and a healthy independence from their parents. However, the opposite of this process is emotional detachment, reflects unhealthy separation from family. Emotional detachment indicates the separation from family is neither successful nor healthy, and the adolescent is not emotionally connected to their families. This form of separation is associated with more adolescent alcohol use and more deviant behaviors. So we did a couple little stats on here too with that. So the quality of relationships with parents and peers during adolescence may facilitate or buffer against adolescent use. Individuals who are emotionally detached from their family also tend to be more influenced by peer pressure. Additionally, individuals who are more likely to succumb to peer pressure are more likely to engage in substance use. And the earlier the age of first substance use is associated with more susceptibility to pressure from peers. Adolescents who reported their first substance use before 6th grade, when compared to those who never used by the end of 6th grade, and those who first used during 6th grade, were found to have more susceptibility to peer pressure and were more likely to be male. I know this age range seems extremely low, but myself being a person in long-term recovery, this is 6th grade is when use started for me, and I grew up in a small town and those types of things. And it's unfortunate, but those are very real statistics. So
peer pressure, always good or always bad? So there is, the term peer pressure is used when people are talking a lot about behaviors that are not considered socially acceptable or desirable, such as experimentation with alcohol and drugs. The term peer pressure is not usually used to describe socially desirable behaviors like exercising or studying, but it isn't always bad. So positive peer pressure, examples of that are pushing a friend to study harder for a test so they can get better grades, or if they have an after-school job, encouraging their friends to get an after-school job, just encouraging illegal substance use. So again, it kind of goes back to that friends being a buffer for substance use. If teens and adolescents are hanging around with children who really are against using, that can really help decrease the chance that another adolescent will use. And then also it's disapproving of like gossiping of other people or spreading rumors. That is all good peer pressure. Peer pressure though can turn into it can be problematic. It can kind of flip. And so an example of that is with sports. So being in sports, it can lead to exposure to healthy lifestyles and role models, and eventually leading the adolescent to become a positive role model themselves and be able to experience different things that being on a team teach us. But that same peer pressure can lead that same adolescent to over-identify with sports, which can they'll end up putting exercise or competition above everything else. So their life really focuses on competition. And if taken to an extreme, sports can lead to an exercise addiction. Kind of switching gears here a little bit. So how to treat addiction. So if we have adolescents who are struggling with addiction, we have a couple of resources here for where you can have children be assessed. Nystrom Associates in Duluth, they offer assessments. They are currently don't have an adolescent program, but they are working on getting it started again. St. Louis County, Marcia Gurno, she she works in the CD department within the county, and she does a lot of the assessments for adolescents, especially those that aren't covered by insurance or their parents have commercial insurance or private insurance. The Center for American Indian Health or Care, that they do them there as well. And then Adults and Teen Challenge in this Twin Cities location. So that's pretty far away, but with telehealth, they may be able to do it. So those are some areas.
Yeah, and so there, as Tanya mentioned, Nystrom's has really been the main one in the Duluth, within the city limits within Duluth. And so one of the things that certainly wanted to mention is the Human Development Center is working towards looking at adolescent treatment and trying to figure that out. Like everything else during this pandemic, it has slowed down the process with licensing and the building of those things. And so wait to hear more, more to come with that. And so in the very near future, that will be something that's offered within HDC as well. But some other treatment options here on this slide. She mentioned Adult and Teen Challenge, Nystrom's. Closest residential treatment facility is Centricare in St. Cloud, Minnesota. We did come up with a bunch more that were in Bemidji and Grand Rapids, some outpatient programs there. But there's also the Native American adolescent age 16 plus are served at Mishkausen Residential, which is in the Cloquet area, and treatment center it's on the reservation out there. Tagui has an outpatient program for adolescents called Minnewayowan, also on the Fond du Lac Reservation. The youngest individual they have served was 11 years old. Northland Recovery Adolescent Center in Grand Rapids, and then Hazelton Betty Ford Treatment Center. Important to note that it is private insurance only. A large majority of the individuals we serve at the Human Development Center are under some sort of PMAP or county funded insurance. And so Hazelton Betty Ford, along with there's a few other ones within the states that provide commercial insurance only. So this is going a little bit further. Newport Academy, Alina Health, Fountain Centers in Rochester, Mayo Clinic, of course, in Rochester as well, Heartland Recovery, and then North Homes was one that we found in Grand Rapids and Bemidji. This link here is Fast Tracker. It's typically used for providers, but it is a great resource when searching out any sort of SUD, substance use disorder treatment center, whether that's outpatient, residential, male, female, looking for LGBTQ community. They really have a great search there. You can enter keywords, all of those things, as well as location within Minnesota. And so that's a great resource too.
Some other resources. So Al-Anon and Alateen, this is a wonderful resource for children who have parents or caretakers that use substances. It's a great support group for them to go and kind of share their experiences and get support with having parents and caregivers that use. It's really neat now with electronics and apps and all of that. There's actually an app that the link is there. You can access the app, but it allows children 13 to 18 to register for it and be able to have a chat meeting instead of going to an actual in-person meeting and having a meeting that way. The other link here is also a link to our district. So this can be for adults as well. You can look up any kind of Al-Anon meeting around here. And then also some preventative stuff. So that's kind of an area that we didn't really focus in a lot for substance use with teens, but really talking to children, really being open about it, really being open and honest about the brain development, really educating them on substances and how they impact the brain and how they affect somebody emotionally. Long term, I mean, legally, we're seeing, children have legal consequences, and that has a very serious impact on their life moving forward. There's a lot of places now for rent. You can't get into a rental very easily if you've got anything on your record. Of course, depending on what it is going to impact, the ability to get in to a place. but also with jobs. So really teaching children that if we make these big mistakes now, they are going to have grave consequences in the future. And SAMHSA, they're the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They are really big with grants for substance use and research. They actually created an app on their phone, and it's called Talk, They Hear You. And I have it on my phone, and it gives you like certain scenarios where you can bring up these conversations, and it has some responses that teens might have, and it kind of gives you another response you can say and rebuttal to what their response is to kind of help keep the conversation going instead of children kind of stopping it, or parents getting stuck with what to say next. So that's a very helpful resource too. So a lot of that talking to children and really being open, and the earlier the better too, not waiting until middle school to have these difficult conversations.
Yeah. Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, I think that these are, as I mentioned in kind of my opening, we're hoping that, the thing that we always look at, and I think if you take away anything from this, is to break the silence, right? It's always the stigma around addiction that, if we don't talk about it, if we hide our children from it, so they don't see it, we keep them away from the particular kids, or keep them out of this neighborhood or that neighborhood, that's going to defend them from it, when in reality, it's having the conversations and arming them with an education and knowledge of the harmful effects of these things and the long-term consequences that can be caused by substance use among adolescents. So
addiction is a family disease. It's not just focused on one person, and that's really important to know, because it impacts everybody in the family. I mean, you may know that if you have a family member or friend that struggles with addiction, it truly is a family disease. And when somebody goes into treatment, it's important to note that it's very helpful for other members of the family to also get into their own therapy or attending the Al-Anon meetings to really support them. Because when somebody comes out of treatment, it's really hard for families to kind of adjust to that. The person who came out of treatment has made all of these changes and trying to use all these coping skills, but families struggle with their role and still kind of stay the same and stay stuck. So we see a lot of stuckness in families. And again, it kind of brings back the closeness of, knowing what your children are doing and being really involved, not being a helicopter parent. It's kind of hard not to be that way these days, especially with electronics and all of that, but really being involved with your children and asking those questions. And there is a great resource if you are struggling with a teen that has they're worried about what they're doing on social media. There is an app that I know of, and it's called Bark, B-A-R-K, and it offers you the ability to monitor the children's phone and monitor social media apps. It doesn't give full conversations of what those what the children are talking about, but it has features where it'll alert you to all these different types of issues. So bullying, self-harm, suicide, risky contacts, drug use. I mean, there's a lot that you can really monitor, and you can set the sensitivities for how many alerts you want for that. And it does cost it is $100 a year, but they do have an option. If money is an issue, they do have an option to work with them to be able to have that reduced cost or even free. So Bark, it's B-A-R-K. So that's a really good resource too. And having a preteen myself, a 13-year-old, I have a 13-year-old, and I use this app, and I can't talk highly about. I mean, I have caught on to things that she could be getting into that are very dangerous. With this app, I would have zero idea what she would be getting into, and it monitors a lot of social media, Snapchat, TikToks, Instagram, Facebook. So it really is a great resource.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Tanya, for that. And I'm sure there's there's tons of other possibilities or applications and things now that are out there to help monitor those things, because that is important, you know, in catching that early. So I wanted to mention that I put the 4 videos in the chat, and so they are there. So you're welcome, before we finish here, you're welcome to copy those and paste those into your own Word format or browser or anything so that you have those. But now at this time, I didn't see any questions in the chat yet, I don't believe, Jamie, but certainly welcome. You're very welcome, Kim. Thanks for sticking with us tonight. And we can open it up to any questions. Kim or Beverly, if either of you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
You might want to raise your hand or put it in the chat, just so we know, because you won't be able to unmute. But if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat.
That's right. Tanya, I guess we can, if you want to jump to the next slide, you're welcome to still put a question in there. We can just talk about this next one. So hopefully there's less technical difficulties, but the next one is on March 8th, here Tuesday, 6 p.m. to 7:30. And it is called How to Talk to Your Kids About Their Mental Health from Your Kids' Point of View. And so that again will be through Zoom on March 8th, 6 p.m. to 7:30. And I believe the next slide here is our contact information. So the top phone number is going to be your general Human Development Center phone number, toll free there as well. If you'd prefer to send an email, this is a general email that will, if you direct it to Tanya or I, or if you're interested in anything else and or know someone and they're afraid to reach out via telephone or just would prefer to use email, that's a way that they can do that. HDC Addiction Services number there. That's the direct line. You can reach it through the phone number above, but that's our direct kind of link to addiction services for scheduling any appointments and or questions. And then Tanya and I's information, as well as office phone numbers and emails, are below here as well.
The last slide here is just the reference page.